resolved that the United States federal government should legalize voluntary euthanasia for patients with specific terminal health diagnoses. Harm A. We offer the following case against the status quo. Harm A. People can suffer for years with debilitating conditions. Evidence 1. Mr. Nicholson said a stroke had left me paralyzed below the neck and unable to speak. I need help in almost every aspect of my life. I cannot scratch if I itch. I cannot pick my nose if it is blocked, and I can only eat if I am fed like a baby. Only I won't grow out of it, unlike the baby. And that was him quoting that, and that's from the New York Times, March 2012. And then evidence 2. I have no privacy or dignity left, he said. I have locked-in syndrome, and I can expect no cure or improvement in my condition as my muscles and joints seize up through lack of use. Indeed, I can expect to dribble my way into old age. And that was him again, and that was in 2011 from the Scientific American. Harm D. The time and resources used for life support in treating terminally ill people could be used more beneficially if that patient was voluntarily euthanized. Evidence 1. According to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, the cost for drugs used in lethal injection is roughly $90. And evidence 2, adjusting for patient and hospital characteristics, the average cost of mechanical ventilation in intensive care unit patients was $1,500 per day, and that's from the National Center for Biotechnology Information, October 2012. And harm C, many patients and families suffer severe pain and grief watching a terminal patient die. Evidence 1. The right of a competent, terminally ill person to avoid excruciating pain and embrace a timely and dignified death bears the sanction of history and is implicit in the concept of ordered liberty. And that's from Case of the Weak Health, October 2012. And evidence 2, Nicholson's condition meant he was unable to commit assisted suicide, and the only way he could end his life was by voluntary euthanasia. He submitted that dignity, humanity, and justice required that he should be permitted to end his life, and he should have the right to do so. And that's from Case of the Weak Health again, October 2012. Inherency A. Only 3 states in the United States allow voluntary euthanasia, the other 47 do not. Evidence 1. In the past 14 years, only 3 states have legalized the procedure, and that's Washington, Oregon, and Montana. And that's from the Dignity and End of the Life Commonweal, October 2012. Evidence 2. According to a values and beliefs poll, 45% of the population now think it is morally acceptable, while 48% believe it is morally wrong, and that's for euthanasia. And that's from the same source. The affirmative has developed a plan to solve the problems in the status quo. Blank 1 mandates. A. Voluntary euthanasia will be legalized for patients of public hospitals with specific terminal illnesses or conditions that render them dependent on life support by the federal government. Evidence 1. Only terminally ill patients or patients whose conditions render them dependent on life support would have the option available to be euthanized, and it would be solely done by their discretion. And the second point, the option is available, but euthanasia is strictly voluntary and does not have to be administered. It's the patient's and the family's choice. Mandate B, in an instant where a person is unconscious for at least 6 months, a living will would decide whether or not the euthanasia should be administered. If someone's request is to die and not become dependent on life support, that's their decision. And the second point, if they don't have a living will, the decision would lie on the immediate family consensus. Link to enforcement. A, the federal government will legalize the law, but violators of this law will be dealt with on the state level, and so the punishment would be enforced within each individual state. And B, if a family or patient requests euthanasia, their request will be honored, and that's only with the consent of the patient that it would be honored. And in the case that a patient is unable to decide, a living will decide what happens, and if they don't have one of those, the immediate family. Enforcement C, euthanasia will be enforced by hospitals and healthcare settings, and as long as the patient is the one calling for euthanasia, it is acceptable, but otherwise the arrest of the violator will occur. And if doctors try to forcefully euthanize people, or in any way try to persuade them to make a decision, they will be prosecuted. And if the family of the patient won't intervene with the choice of the patient once it's been made. Plank 3 administration, euthanasia will be legalized by the federal government and be put into effect in all states. And in Oregon, the state legislature was the first to legalize euthanasia, and that was the Oregon Death with Dignity Act. and Montana and Washington then followed, and these are the only 3 states that have it been legalized, like I said. And then in Oregon, it sets the guidelines for what is required for euthanasia to even be brought up in a hospital setting and how it should be handled. And also in Oregon, the patient must have had the terminal illness for at least 6 months for euthanasia to be discussed, and the patient then must verbally ask for the medicine from the doctor, and the doctor will have no moral or questionable doubt with administering it. And that's funding. By choosing voluntary euthanasia, families and hospitals and insurance providers will save money, as opposed to pay for life support, therefore creating no additional funding requirements. Our last contention proves that our plan will solve the problems. Solvency A. Our plan will, for harm A, which talks about the patient's quality of life, would be solved by legalizing euthanasia if the patient
That's
found
fine.
out